Good afternoon. Thank you for your time today, Congressman.
Thanks
Let's
for having
start with the news of the week, and that's the ethanol announcement. And maybe you could just frame for us what the impact of that announcement will be on the state of Iowa.
Well, we expect we'll see the markets react to that, and I haven't checked them as we speak today. But the estimate was that there would be 700 million bushel of corn that would be processed that wouldn't otherwise be. So that's another market for 700 bushel of corn, 700 million bushel of corn. But actually, theoretically, it's 7 billion bushel because it allows us to go from the E10 blend wall to an E15 blend wall. So that's a pretty big impact potentially. And going year round, it says to our station operators, you don't have to switch your labels on your tanks. You can just go to E15 in what was otherwise an E10 tank, if that's your preference. So we'll sell more. I sat with the president a week ago and talked about this, and I knew when I left the Oval Office that we were going to go to E15, but I made this argument to him. Let's not create another blend wall at E15. I want to blow clear on through E15 to E20, 30, 50, 85. And President Trump said, you would go all the way to E90, wouldn't you? And well, sure I would, but I want the consumers to decide. I don't want the government to decide. And so I think this is an important milestone. It sends the right message to the marketplace and a right message to our producers. But it's, I've just put this little warning out. Let's not get stuck with an E15 blend wall, because I think the consumers are going to demand an E20 or an E30 eventually.
Following up on that, with consumers, how do you convince motorists to use, more motorists to use E15? I think there's some reluctance. There's some confusion maybe with E85, which certain engines can't burn. And I've talked to people, and they think it may, E15 might be hazardous for their engine. And I guess there's, it seems like there's a lot of education that maybe still needs to be done. And
well, I'll take a shot at convincing the consumers right now.
Okay.
And that's this. Watertown, South Dakota, over a number of years, has 50 million miles driven on multiple vintages of vehicles, some of them pre-2001, all on E30. And with 50 million miles on E30, multiple vehicles, there isn't a single mechanical problem that's rooted in fuel. They may have had a bearing go out of a wheel or something, but no engines were faulty because of the fuel, and that's E30. And so I know that the petroleum industry has made the other arguments, and they constantly say, well, maybe we can't win the argument on vehicles, but we can. But it's hard on your chainsaw, hard on your lawnmower, hard on your boat motor. And I said, why is it that the people that have been using ethanol for the last couple, 3 decades, why don't we have those stories? Only if you grow up in the oil patch do you have those stories. And so I promised General Kelly that I would take my chainsaw and I would put E30 in my chainsaw and cut a tree up and send him the video. I still have that to do, but that's one of the ways to convince him of it. And we live in the middle of this. We know the people that have, and we've burned ethanol in everything we've had for a long time. I have a lawnmower. I don't know if it's as old as Chuck Grassley's, but it's at least 20 years old, and I don't believe we have ever had a drop of anything in it except E10, and it's still running great, and it's got about 1,400 or 1,500 hours on it.
We'll stay on agriculture. Today, what's your level of concern about the continuing trade war with China and the tariffs? And overall, do you consider and view President Trump as a friend of farmers and of agriculture?
Well, I do consider him a friend of farmers, and I know that's in his head and in his heart. When you listen to him talk, it comes back up, and so I know that that's true. I have said that I would not have started the renegotiations of NAFTA, which he did, and I wouldn't have started these trade conflicts that we have. But once this was launched by our president, our choices were this. Do we want to fight him on it and tell him to retreat, or do we want to give him the strongest hand possible and help him get to the place where we get the best result we can? And I chose that option, that once he made those decisions, I supported them, because backing up means we might actually lose ground rather than gain. And we see now that the negotiations have culminated with the Mexico, Canada, and United States agreement. That's better for us. Some will argue it's not much better, but it's still better. And we have a South Korean agreement. I believe the Chinese are starting to now pay attention, and their economy has shown some signs of significant decline. And I think we'll get that resolved. But it's the theft of intellectual property that always was the center of this with regard to our trade with China. And about a dozen years ago, I went to China to press them on their piracy of our intellectual property. And after, it was a 5-city tour, and on the 3rd city was Beijing, and I listened to exactly the same presentation come in Beijing was within the first 2 cities that we were at. I leaned back in my chair at that diplomatic table and I typed a bill draft request off, sent to Washington, that said draft a bill to direct the U.S. Trade Representative to conduct a study to determine the value of intellectual property stolen by the Chinese and apply a duty to all products coming from China in an amount equivalent to recover that loss and distribute those proceeds to the rightful intellectual property rights holders. That bill, when I brought it back to Washington, we got some momentum on it, and then Hollywood and Nashville pushed back. They didn't want to have that fight for some reason. Now it's in the hands of the White House. I spoke with the president about it a week ago, and it's in the hands of Larry Kudlow and Peter Navarro. And so we've got a chance now to move that legislation, but that's pretty harsh as much as they're stealing today. They probably have to dial that down a little bit to get it to work. But I think that if we can get the intellectual property issue resolved with the Chinese, the rest of the trade comes along pretty quickly. And in the end, what we've done is we've opened up our trade, expanded our trade agreement with South Korea. We've opened up other trade negotiations. Japan would be one of those. We have an opening with the European Union for the first time, I will say, ever in at least my adult lifetime, that we've had real prospects of marketing into Europe. And I've got several other things going on. The Taiwanese we know about, and there are others that I'm not at liberty to discuss yet. But I'm starting to see this pattern of we had one big pipe going to China, and that pipe's been constricted substantially because of the trade retaliatory tariffs that they put on. But while that's been going on from the beginning of these negotiations, the administration has been pushing to open up pipes to smaller countries. So if the volume of these smaller pipes can add up to what was coming or what we were sending to China, we could end up with a Chinese agreement down the road a few months and have these other trade negotiations put together. We may be better off. I can see that pattern. I can't predict it, but I can see the pattern.
Any sense of, people talk about having patience, any sense of how long a process this could be before the possibility? I mean, you're looking into a crystal ball, I understand that, but from your discussions, any sense of, is this a long term, or is the gap narrowing? Are we getting closer to something with China that might result in an end to this trade war?
Well, I'd say, Mike, that the administration came to me probably last March and said, what are we going to do to help bridge our farmers through this if this gets bad? And I said to them then, I don't want to be shaping a program for a problem that doesn't exist yet, to fill a hole that hasn't yet been created. We won't know what that hole looks like till it's here, so let's react to that part. But they've been paying attention to what this does to agriculture all along. And I also said to them, I'm going to stick with you on this, but when the beans start to turn in the fall, if we have especially young producers out there that are combining $7 beans, it's going to get serious in the Midwest. And of course the Chinese knew that because they slapped their tariffs on soybeans and pork, just directly aimed at the 4th Congressional District of Iowa, which is #1 in the country. So I was really quite nervous about the middle of August and up to Labor Day. And when we're coming together and just getting the resolution of the Canadian agreement, then I can see now a path where we can get done more quickly than I thought. And I don't want to put a deadline on that, but it's accelerating faster than I thought it was going to accelerate. And I'm not thinking in terms of years at this point, so it would be in terms of months, although, there's 12 months in a year, Mike.
I mean, obviously your opponent is making that a big issue and saying that producers in the 4th District and elsewhere in Iowa and other states are suffering as a result of the retaliatory tariffs, and that it is going to create a lot of financial harm this fall. I mean, you talk about waiting a few months, but that may be too late for some producers. And I guess how would you respond to that?
Well, there's only so much power that's vested within one of 435 congressional seats, and I'm concerned about those same things. And I've spoken a lot about. We have producers out there that have their bins are full of grain, and their equipment's all paid for, their land's all paid for, they've got cash in the bank to put inputs in for next year. They're on one end of this spectrum, and they're never going to go broke if they can pay their taxes. The other side of this is our young guys that are on all rented land, highly leveraged on their equipment, maybe sharing equipment with another neighbor in a similar circumstance, and their cash flow doesn't work right now. It's tight, but it doesn't work. That's a tough equation to try to solve it from one end of that spectrum to the other. But what they need are markets, and their producers are telling me, we don't want aid, we want trade. And so we put $12 billion worth of aid in there to bridge this. That's going to help some, and I'm afraid we'll lose some. But you know, we look back through history, we've hit these cycles in the past. I lived through the 80s. I know how painful that was, and I don't want to go back and revisit that in any way. But I do have experience with that entire decade of the 80s. And I started the construction business doing custom work on farms in 1975. By the time we got to 1980, January 6th of 1980 was the date that Jimmy Carter embargoed our grain sales to the Soviet Union. And everything dropped out of bed at that point. And it just put the brakes on anything that we could do. We suffered through the 80s and you know, day by day sometimes. I know what that was like. I went to farm sales all over. I could drive you around my neighborhood and tell you who used to live there before we buried their buildings and now we're farming over it. So I know there are others that probably felt that pain more than I did, but I've experienced a lot of it and I've shared that with a lot of people. I do not want to see that again. But the view that we have on this side is that this has started. So does anybody have a better idea now that it's started? I mean, do they want to surrender? They want to plead with the Chinese? We'll do whatever you want to do, keep stealing our intellectual property and having imbalanced tariffs sitting on our products that we are trying to send to you. Because if you want to surrender, you're going to end up with a worse deal than we had before. And I think on the other side of this, we're going to be, a lot of us, better off. But I wish there was an easy solution for those people that are highly leveraged and paying cash rent.
When you say surrender, you mean if you get rid of the tariffs and go back to no tariffs? You said, does anybody have a better answer,
Right.
better idea? So if we give up the tariffs, you're saying that we're going to be worse off right now if they were stopped as we sit here right now. Is that right?
Well, there's no guarantee that the Chinese will say we can go back to where we were. If we call a truce, that might mean the Chinese say, now we know we really got you on the run. And so we're going to start slapping more retaliatory tariffs on there till we find out what the U.S. limit is. I mean, we can't just presume that we can guarantee we go back to where we were. But if we go back to where we were, they're going to accelerate their theft of our intellectual property. Those numbers are between $500 and $600 billion a year. I mean, that's equivalent to the trade with China. If we put 100% tariff on there, that's why I say I don't think it's going to work to do it 100% now, because it's gotten so far out of hand. But that's how bad this is, and no nation should allow another country to steal its intellectual property at any rate, let alone the rate the Chinese are. You know, we're a creative country, and our culture, it produces this creativity. We have education, we have entrepreneurs, we have a mindset of always trying to solve problems. We solve those problems and invent things, and the Chinese steal them as fast as we can invent them, and then they reproduce them. I'll give you an example. September 11th, we all know about that, what happened on September 11th, 2001. And then an American invented the cockpit door for the airplane to protect the pilots from that ever happening again. The Chinese bought exactly one of those cockpit doors, and then they just replicated that, reverse engineered it, and that's one of the examples of how they steal our intellectual property. It's not maybe big dollars, but it's still significant. And there are billions of dollars. I just helped a man who had invented the software program to manage the electrical distribution from wind turbines. And he set up a global company doing that. And he had encrypted his software so that the Chinese couldn't hack it. But he had to hire, he's operating in China and in Austria and in the United States that I can think of, probably other countries. The Chinese went in and paid $1.2 million to bribe one of his employees to get the code on the encryption data. They hacked his software, and then they took it over, and they're handling the distribution in China. His lawsuit was billions of dollars. He just stopped in to thank me because he got the settlement that he had hoped to get. Well, it wasn't all that he hoped to get, but he got a settlement that was as good as it could be. it's one of the things going on behind the scenes that we usually don't come out and talk about that. But this is, none of this affects my finances that I can see, but it's personal because I'm looking these people in the eye that are having their intellectual property stolen, and that's got to stop. And I think that, so I want to paint the picture that gets us to this place where the Chinese stop stealing our intellectual property. If we build them for it, they will stop. If not, we won't care. We'll just hand the money over to the people that own that intellectual property. So I want that to stop. Second thing is I want to trade with China, and they want to trade with the U.S., and I'm happy to see us opening up these trade negotiations with multiple countries around the world. Those are things I've worked for a long time, and we have other projects going on that are that give me great hope that down the road a little ways we're going to see stronger markets than we saw before this trade thing began.
One more question about President Trump, who will loom large over the midterm elections, obviously. Your overall assessment of his almost 2 years in office, and more specifically, one part of his first 2 years, I'm curious to get your take on, and that is when he refers to the news media as the enemy of the people. Do you share that viewpoint?
No, no, and in fact, I think that you and people around this board know that I see the news media as an essential tool for freedom. And if we don't have that ability to put a message out and get a message back, you're the nexus for that communication. If we don't have that, we don't have freedom. And so I'm different than a lot of members of Congress. I think I've got great relations with the media. When I go out into the speaker's lobby and it's full of media and there's a whole group that comes around, I know a lot of those folks by their first name, and I joke with them. We laugh. We are serious when we need to be serious. And so that's the view I have, although I will say that there's a significant amount of the national media, and I'll say mainstream media out there, that they're not obsessed with the truth. And I don't remember it being so stark in any time up until the last few years. I know that at one point I was doing an interview with Chris Cuomo on his CNN program, and I've got a good relationship with Chris. He can be sharply critical and intensely pressing, but sometimes I like to just do a little verbal pugilism with him. And we were doing that, and at some point he said, I quoted Gateway Pundit, which was the fourth most influential conservative website coming into this election on the data. Actually, I don't remember the subject was, and he said, what you're quoting, we've already discredited Gateway Pundit. Why are you quoting they've been discredited, your information doesn't matter. I know what it was. It was about the algorithms that are shutting down some of the conservative sites. And I said, this data is convincing to me from Gateway Pundit. And so he disparaged Gateway Pundit, and I said, Chris, you're CNN and you're telling me this? And at another point, he read a quote back to me from the Daily Beast. And he said, you said this, Congressman. And so he read this quote, and I said, where did that come from? He said, the Daily Beast. And I said, I never said that. Well, I've got it right here from the Daily Beast. And I said, if you don't have the videotape, you've got nothing. So that's some of the battles that we have. I think the president's criticism sometimes is legitimate and well-placed. But I think that the American people are in the process of learning how to discern the truth from all of the competing sources of information we have, from cyberspace to print media to television to radio. And we aren't there yet. Our society isn't there yet where we've settled in a comfort zone with how we deal with all of this massive information that's available to us. But it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Well, your overall assessment of him is quite positive. At least it has been so far. I believe at one point you gave him a 9 on a scale of 10. You were asked to give him a number, and I think it was a 9 on a scale of 10 in terms of how you think he's doing. Yeah,
I don't remember the date on when that was, but I will say now, Brett remembers the date.
That was our conversation.
Okay. But no, I think I'd put him about in that same category, maybe a 9.5 right now. And what I'd say to people to think about is that they get wrapped up in trying to judge his personality or some of the things about his history. And I look at this and I think, what are we getting? What do we have for policy? What's been accomplished here? And, I've been in this before where I've had people that come in and maybe disagree with me, but I look and see what do they want? What do they want to accomplish? And you can sometimes find you can accomplish a lot of the things you care about together. So we have We have tax cuts, and we have deregulation. We have a much, much stronger foreign policy that's moving in the right direction in a significant way. Our military is being restored. You put those pieces together, we've got a 4.2% GDP growth in the last quarter, and the Fed announced that it would be over 3% for the fiscal year, which I presume they did. I didn't see the news on that. So all these indicators that we have, and by the way, the appointments to the Supreme Court are just terrific. They are constitutionalists. People get wrapped up in the decisions they will make. I think we need to have constitutionalists, and we do. So and Trump's work ethic, it's unbelievable. I mean, I'm kind of an insomniac. I don't sleep much, and I seem to want to always be working when I'm awake. But I don't know that I could keep pace with Donald Trump day after day after day. He has an agenda that impresses me, and mine is the agenda that's pretty fast. So he's working not just hard for the American people and smart. And, Washington is a magnet for smart people. There are lots of smart people out there. And what separates them, smart people with a good sense of morality and a good work ethic, then what separates them, and I have learned over the years that it's those with good instincts rise above those that are just exceptionally intelligent. And I don't know whether Trump is smarter than most of the people he runs into. He's intelligent enough without any doubt. He has a good memory and he's got a quick recall, but his instincts are the piece that people have misjudged on him. And he operates with confidence on his instincts and just in a moment, which means he can address a lot of subject matter quickly. He can walk into an arena without a lot of prep time and deal with it. And one of the examples last night would be down at the rally in Council Bluffs, as he was giving his speech. He said, well, something to the effect of, they told me there'd be some people here from Nebraska. And his huge cheer went up. And he said, well, wait a minute. Nebraska, I'm talking to an Iowa crowd. They'd said there'd be some Nebraska here. I want to find out. And he picked this up on the go. And he said, all right, all you from Iowa, let's hear from you. And we all cheered as much as we could. And he said, Nebraska. And there we were outnumbered 2-1 by the folks from Nebraska. And they cheered like they were at a Husker game. And then after a while, they started to chant, Go Big Red. But he just flowed into that with his instincts told him this wasn't the crowd he expected, but he took great advantage of that and multiplied it. He's a master communicator, and I've seen how he's operated for a long time, and I've known him for a number of years. His instincts run this in a way that the public doesn't yet understand. And I've said, this is for years I've said, and Brett, you probably heard me say that, I want a president who is an enigma, who will also play brinksmanship. And we got that with this president. He is an enigma, and he does play brinksmanship. He took brinksmanship all the way to the wall with Trudeau in the Canadian deal, and essentially he told Trudeau, I don't care if we get a deal or not. And some minutes later they had a deal. So let's watch what he does and watch the results that we get. The results are terrific. And style points, I don't want to grade him on style. I've just graded him on results, 9.5.
All right. I want to move to a couple issues related to, in my view, accountability with constituents. You're not going to debate your opponent this year. I'm wondering why. And you don't do a lot of town halls, and I'm wondering why. And do you not believe debates and town halls speak to accountability to constituents?
Well, this is a different environment we have now. It's changed. One is on the debate side. I've always said that debates would be to sort things out if you had a confusion about where people stood on the issues. I think that's up to him to make his point, and people understand where I stand. I mean, I don't get questions of, can you bring a little more clarity to this? People know, they know where I stand. And if they don't, these questions that would be asked in a debate are being asked here. And so they're going to hear from the Sioux City Journal if they haven't heard it from me in some way before. Town hall meetings, I do meetings all over this district. And we do a lot of chamber meetings, economic development meetings, interest group meetings of all kinds, agriculture, manufacturing, you name it. But the town hall meetings, the people pressing for town hall meetings want those town hall meetings so that they can have a forum for a demonstration. They're not interested in having dialogue, they're interested in demonstrating. And so I just said, I'm not going to play into those hands. I'm going to keep meeting with people, and if they have a meeting request, contact my office. I don't think anybody has been left unresponded to, but I just don't think it's wise or constructive to create a forum for demonstrations just so they can make the news.
On debates, in some election cycles you have debated. In one election cycle, I think with Christine Vilsack, there were a half dozen perhaps debates.
7, not that I'm counting.
No. And then in other cycles, no debates at all. Mm-hmm. Why are some years different from others in terms of how you view debates?
Well, one thing is that, they poured $7.5 million over my head at the Christie Vilsack race in 2012. So, there's no way I could match that kind of expenditures. That we probably generated about half of that out of our campaign, although it was more money than anybody had ever raised before in that campaign. So we needed the earned media that we could get out of that, and we needed to generate the kind of discussions that really brought her out as a kind of candidate we thought she might be, but we really didn't know until we got into those debates. About probably the second or third debate, I could see what she was made of and what kind of a candidate she was going to be. So there's a case where they didn't know Christie Vilsack very well. She had all kinds of money, and she had the president and the first lady and the vice president and the second lady and Bill Clinton twice into this district. All of that was coming at me, and so what you do is you have to fight that on all fronts, and that's what we did. But I don't know that there were any issues that were clarified, except I told her that I knew when her life began, and she couldn't tell me when her life began because she'd lose the debate on life. And I think she also took note when she said that we didn't need to have large magazines for our guns, and I told her that she's not going to take my AR away from me. There were a couple of things in that debate I do remember, Mike, so perhaps we clarified them a little bit.
I want to move to an issue that is one of your biggest issues, and that is illegal immigration. And I wanted to ask you for kind of an assessment of what you believe the biggest priorities are within that issue that need to be addressed, and then why do you oppose the DACA program? Maybe you can make that part of the answer, please.
Mm-hmm. I think so. There's, first of all, in the middle of last summer, I guess it's a year ago last June or July, I brought 4 bills through off the floor of the House of Representatives within 24 hours and 6 minutes. By the way, I'm going to address this piece that says Steve King never gets anything done. In one 24-hour and 6-minute period, I stood on the floor and managed and pushed 4 of my bills through in that period of time. One of them was medical malpractice insurance, tort reform, maybe we get to that, but the other 3 were immigration issues. Ban on sanctuary cities, that gives individuals standing to sue local government if they're releasing people that need to stay in jail or failing to notify ICE. Sanctuary cities. The second one is Kate's Law, and we all know about that in Kansas or in San Francisco. And the third one is Sarah's Law, which is named after Sarah Root, who was killed by an illegal alien in Council Bluffs. Matter of fact, just last night I talked to her mother. I want to put this into this discussion because to me this is just very personal and very, very human. Michelle Root, the mother, the tragic grieving mother of her lost daughter Sarah, her only daughter Sarah, and she has a son named Scott. She has been a stalwart warrior to try to bring forth the rule of law and enforce immigration law. She understands, as I have long understood, that people who are unlawfully in America, if we enforce the law, aren't going to be here to kill people. And we are losing many, many Americans in the way that we lost Kate and we lost Sarah Root. But last night, after the presidential rally, Michelle Root came over to me to give me a hug, and she came 2 or 3 times, but she brought another woman with her. I believe her name was Patty, and I want to circle back to get that right. But I have a picture in my iPhone, and Sarah Root was an organ donor. And I have a wristband, a bracelet, that I keep down on the antlers in my man cave that's stacked up with a whole series of them that are victims of being killed by illegal aliens. But that wristband, that bracelet says Sarah saved 6. Well, I met the wife last night who was with Michelle, whose husband has within him Sarah's heart. And they are friends at a political rally together. So this is a statistics supported by what you see when you're dealing with people that are grieving over us not enforcing the law. So for me, the center of this from the very beginning, probably well before I was elected to any office, was about restoring their respect for the rule of law. In fact, I know it was because I was standing in my construction office in 1986 when Reagan signed the Amnesty Act. And I've told people many times that I expected that Reagan would veto it, even though the House and the Senate was passing the legislation, because he would understand the damage that this did to the rule of law. When you reward lawbreakers, you get more lawbreakers. And I knew in 1986 that we would be years restoring the respect for the rule of law. We were on the cusp of doing that when we elected Donald Trump. But you asked about the most important things. I named 3 pieces of legislation. We've got to build a wall. The wall keeps, we're never going to keep all of the illegal drugs out of America, but 80 to 90% of the illegal drugs consumed in America come from or through Mexico. Now I see numbers today that go as far as 74,000 Americans died due to drug overdose last year. Somewhere between 64 and 74, I've seen 3 numbers. But even if you boil it down to the 64,000 that were killed, about 1/3 of them died because of prescription overdose, and we're addressing that, I think, kind of effectively. And 2/3 of them, though, from illegal drug overdose. We build the wall, we can better control the drugs that are coming into the United States. It will save lives. It may save tens of thousands of lives. Second is our national security, that we have terrorists that are coming across that border. They pay the highest price to have the best chance of sneaking into America. We don't hear about that because as soon as they're turned over to the FBI, that incident becomes classified, and the Border Patrol can't even tell me about it unless I pry myself into a classified briefing. So that's a danger that I'm well aware of, maybe not yet well aware of because I'm missing some of that information. Those are 2 things. Another thing is that we've long needed a tighter labor supply in America, and that'll shock some people to hear that. But the middle class has been narrowed down because we've had the unskilled are the highest unemployment we have are the unskilled. And so wherever there's the most labor supply, it's on the unskilled. That keeps the unskilled labor force down, wages lower and benefits lower. If that gets tighter, we've already seen some of the results of that, wages and benefits go up, and because there's some enforcement of immigration law, and because of the tax cuts, we're seeing that the wages and benefits are going up, and the middle class is broadening now for the first time in a long time. So what would I do? First, I'd build a wall. I would pass the New IDEA Act, and I spoke with the president about this directly a week ago also. And what the New IDEA Act does this, it clarifies that wages and benefits paid to illegals are not deductible for federal income tax purposes. It provides the employer with safe harbor if he uses VE Verify, and then it puts the IRS, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Social Security Administration in a working committee so that they're working to enforce immigration law, and then it has a 6-year statute of limitations, so that an employer can look at this and think, boy, I've got about half illegals working for me. If the IRS comes in tomorrow, I'm in trouble, but I don't want to shut my company down. So I'm going to take some of that risk and start cleaning up my workforce and hope to get to the place where E-Verify protects you entirely. I mean, this is a well thought out piece of legislation. And by the way, it generates, according to a score by the Center for Immigration Studies, $254 billion in revenue. And I'm looking to get this into the next tax bill. So that's, I think, a very important piece. It shuts down incrementally, without jerking the rug out from underneath business, it shuts down illegal employment. So those are, and then DACA is the last part of that question, Mike. And the reason I oppose granting amnesty to DACA recipients is because it's a reward for lawbreakers in the same fashion as we had back in 1986. And if that should happen, we're done restoring respect for the rule of law in America. That mission that I have been working on since '86 essentially gets 86th. And I've never used that expression before, but it seems ironic that it comes up that way. So there are some other alternatives that I'll say others are going to be more effective discussing, but I have to hold the line on the rule of law. And if I don't know if we hold it in Congress. I said to my colleagues here a couple, 3 months ago in a speech before the conference closed door that over 200 of them had never voted for amnesty. And I said, and I've put those amendments in front of you and you've supported every one of them. So all of you who haven't voted against my amendments to defund amnesty, you're pure today. You've never voted against the rule of law. But I said, if you vote for one of these two bills that have amnesty in front of you, you can never say you're pure again. And there were about a third of them that kind of gave a little, expression of discontent with what I had said. But I reminded them that if you vote and you vote for amnesty, then every other decision that comes up on amnesty is going to be a pragmatic one, not a principled decision. And I want to always be making decisions on principle. So we're holding that principle together. It's more my job to do that than anybody else in Congress. But I'm one of all the rest of them, so it's possible they could roll me on this one.
The devil's advocate would say that the DACA recipients didn't make the decision themselves. They were brought here by the lawbreakers, as you called them. You draw no distinction between the two, the adult who makes the decision to, as you said, break the law and enter the country illegally, and children who were brought here. They didn't make the decision. They were brought here and then have gone on through the years to become students and professionals and established a life. They didn't originate the idea of crossing the border illegally themselves, but here they are. You see no distinction between the two.
Some of them do meet the description that you've described, Mike, but I don't think that's a majority of them. In fact, I think it's quite a ways away from a majority of them. I mean, I go down to the border and watch what's going on. I talk to the Border Patrol agents. I sit in and ride with them, and you learn a lot when you're having those kind of conversations into the night, especially on the night shift, because they seem to want to talk then. But we call children all the way up to the day before their 18th birthday. They're still children. And so I finally got the data on the DACA recipients, and there were around a little over 2 million applications, 14 pages each. The Obama administration never put them in an electronic database. They just shoved them off in filing cabinets. And I had to generate, it was my third general accountability study that I had done on this topic, and finally I had to go over there with my staff, and I had 3 or 4 of my staff around the table. It was like this, and we negotiated what we could get from them. What we got was a report that's published out there now, and it was published maybe 4 or 5 months ago, but it's this, that over 59,000 of them, let's see if I can get these numbers right, over 59,000 of them have been arrested since they were approved for DACA. And this is out of a universe of 817,000, to be fair, so you can calculate that percentage. But
this data comes from the Border Patrol?
This came from Homeland Security, and I'm going to say that, and Center for Immigration, the U.S. Center for Immigration Services, headed up by, his name will come to me in a little bit, but they're the ones that issue visas and other things. So it's their responsibility to hold that within DHS. But there were some over 54,000 who had arrest records who were approved for DACA on their first application. Then you look through the chart on there and say, what are they made of? What would be a typical profile? It's kind of hard to tell, because the information was not designed to give us a look at who was being approved. It was designed to approve the DACA applicants. And so what I do know is if they've been getting an education and they're highly educated, there's actually one doctor. And there's out of all 817,000. There are 2 professionals out of all 817,000. I believe the number is 32 master degrees out of 817,000. And then a whole number of them, a number I don't have retained in my memory, don't have any record of ever having gone to school at all. They didn't even attest that they ever went to school. And some of these are disqualifiers from being approved, but the Obama administration approved them anyway. Now we're starting to get these applications into a database and get a better look. So I think America should step back because even though there's really good people in every universe of folks that you want to carve out, I don't think we understand what a typical look is about the DACA recipients. And another thing the public needs to know is that, I mean, I go down into those countries and I talk to people down there, and we've got a decent feel for this. I've gone down into Guatemala to review their judicial system. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, of course, and it's part of it. But when you look at the data, 9 of the 10 most violent countries in the world are south of the Rio Grande. And one of them's not Mexico. Mexico is 19th. But so 9 of the 10, I think it's Swaziland is the other country that's in the top 10. They're about 9th out of 10. And so we're importing, a majority of them are young men say in the ages of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and a little over that too, 18, 19, and 20, young men out of that universe, people that in many countries would soon be or actually be available to be drafted into the military. We're taking young men out of those countries and moving them here. Democrats say to me, we have to get them out of there because it's a violent country and they'll get killed down there. And they don't ever imagine that they're importing murderers along with that group of people. But if you're going to go to any demographic, in any group that you want to choose, whether they're the most peaceful people in the world, pick the Japanese, they have the lowest violent death rate in the world, but you go into the young men in Japan, that's where you're going to find the most violence. It's true in every civilization, but we're taking young men from the 9 of the 10 most violent countries in the world, bringing them into America, and yeah, I'm not supposed to say what's going on here, but Americans are dying at their hands.
Can I ask how many illegal immigrants do we have in Iowa? Do you have any kind of figures on that? Do you track that at all? And
you know, I don't know, and I don't know how reliable those numbers would be, but my approach to this, and I think it's important that the journal readers know this, is that I have always looked at the national policy. And if I started looking at addressing the immigration issues within this 4th congressional district, then it becomes localized. And I think that we have to accept the idea that, you know, these are national policy issues. I want it, whatever national policy does for America, I have to be willing to accept it here in the 4th district.
do you think, though, it's coming to us? Do you think we're seeing a big influx of people that are getting this far from the border?
Well, I think it's been here for some time, probably a long time. And you know, people should remember that I went to high school in Denison. I was born in Storm Lake. I live halfway in between. Those two counties, Crawford and Buena Vista, are 2 of the most diverse counties in America. And in Iowa, the 3rd one would be over Marshalltown. So, I mean, I know the flow of this, and I've watched I've watched the impact of this. And, you know, people always want to make it about something other than what it is. And I'm talking about the impact that it's had on our country, the impact it's had on lives, the impact it's had on wages. And so I want to see people, you know, I look back in the days when, say, High Grade was operating in Storm Lake, and a worker at High Grade then would earn about the same salary that a teacher with a 4-year degree would earn. And they could buy and pay for a modest home and hope to send their children off to college and live happily ever after in a relatively medium income type of a life. And then those wages have been driven down now, and those things don't work that way anymore. And it's about supply and demand of the labor market is a big part of this. But I want to emphasize that, you know, I have friends across the whole spectrum, and I have this gift that I'm very grateful for, is I like people. And I don't find people in any category that others categorize them in that I don't like. But I also have a responsibility, and part of it's to tell the truth and be objective and be knowledgeable on the data. And so that's, you know, that's where I stand on this. Restore the rule of law. Let's broaden the middle class, and let's make sure that the people that are in America are legally here. If we do that, then we can get to a legitimate immigration policy that needs to be designed to enhance the economic, the social, and the cultural well-being of the United States of America. We can't be the relief valve for all the poverty in the world. This lifeboat would sink if we did that.
Can I ask one more about...
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit.
Sure.
We can help people in their home countries far more economically than we can bring them here to help them.
What did you mean when you said people want to make this something other than what it is? Are you talking about race? Is that what you're...
That's what they're talking about. I mean, it's all of these categories.
I mean, people ascribe race racial motives to you. Is that what you're saying?
Sure.
Okay. And you're saying that's not the case.
What I'm saying is, if I ever start to defend such allegations, it never ends. You know, there's no way to defend yourself, and if that charge came to you or anybody else, there's no way you can defend yourselves either. I mean, I think we saw an example of that with Kavanaugh before the Senate Judiciary, and so you can't disprove a negative.
On the issue of immigration, you probably have seen a lot. There got a lot of attention for this Esquire's piece that on Devin Nunes' family and in civilly, and the insinuation that a lot of the most of the dairy farms in that area and throughout the district could not operate without undocumented workers. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but what was your reaction to that?
I read it all because
okay.
I knew I needed to read it for Devin's case.
Okay.
And I'll say that I don't know, but my focus is national policy. Mm-hmm. I'm not driving around the district looking for ways we can bring enforcement in, because if I did that, then I'd get away from the broader job. So, but I do know his parents. I know his brother. I've been up there to the dairy farm and visited with them. It's been a few years ago, 3 or 4 or something. I think a lot of Devin Nunes. He's an honorable man with a very level head, and he's been put under a lot of pressure, and they're trying to undercut him in every way that they can, and the politics splashed out of California into Iowa this time.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Can I just one more on the wall? In this day of technology, why do we have to build a physical wall? Isn't there something we can do with high-tech kind of ways of protecting the border, or does it have to be? I look back at something like the Berlin Wall, and you know at some point somebody's going to say, tear down that wall. Why can't it be done electronically or some other kind of way like that?
Well, if you remember, Barack Obama declared that he wasn't going to enforce immigration law, that he had prosecutorial discretion. That applied to DACA and DAPA at least. And so my point is, in setting it up this way, is that walls don't have prosecutorial discretion. Whoever is the president, they're not going to be crossing that wall if that wall sits there. Second thing is, and so I don't have confidence that a subsequent administration is going to enforce immigration law. The past one hasn't. In fact, we've had declining enforcement of immigration of our southern border in particular. Ever since Eisenhower, each president has enforced it less and less. So, but I say this, that walls don't have prosecutorial discretion. They will be there, it will stand there, it will be effective, and it also is a symbol to the rule of law. And it says to the world, we respect the law, and we're going to enforce the law, and this wall is going to stand here as a monument to the enforcement of the law. With regard to the Berlin Wall, I have a piece of that on my desk in Washington, D.C., and I cherish that. And I tell people, it's not great big, it's like this in a frame, but I tell people, this piece of this wall represents the single most significant historical event in my lifetime. When that's literally a piece of the Iron Curtain that came crashing down November 9th, 1989. And it meant that freedom echoed across into the Eastern Bloc countries. For a while it echoed all the way to the Pacific Ocean before the Russians pulled it back again. So that's very inspirational to me. But if you look at the history of walls, I asked this of Victor Davis Hanson, who is one of the top historians in the country, and I read about all that he writes because I so respect his intelligence. But I had him as a guest speaker for breakfast one morning, and so I asked him this. I said, of all the walls that are out there, can you think of any walls built by nations that are designed to keep people in rather than out? And he thought for a long time, especially in that setting, and he said, well, other than the Berlin Wall, maybe the barrier, the wall and fence between North and South Korea is designed to keep people in. That's an informed response. I agree with that. Can you think of any others? No. Every other wall, was it Harriden's Wall in England, and in the north there's the barriers in northern Germany that were put in by the Romans. Every wall I can think of other than the Berlin Wall and the barrier between North and South Korea were designed to keep people out, not in. And those walls have worked. That's why we build them. And there are many of them around the world today, and more are being built as we speak. So they are effective and they're cost effective. The Israelis, they're at 99% effectiveness with theirs, and their survival depends upon it. So, but I do think that 30 feet's too tall. We didn't need to build 30 feet, and 20 feet would be a stretch for me. I would just go, 14, 15 feet, and then put some deterrent on top of there, and leave it at that. So,
how do you react when you hear the term multiculturalism? Do you think diversity strengthens or weakens our country, and why?
I remember when I first walked into the Iowa Senate, and that's been a little while ago, I walked in there a fan and a supporter of multiculturalism because I viewed it as a way that we could respect all people. It didn't take me very long to shift that position around and realize that, no, it's being used as a political tool instead of a way of respecting cultures. So now we're at this place where we are encouraged by, I'll say, social media, the culture itself, to identify people according to race, ethnicity, national origin. And when you put that all together, it ends up dividing us rather than uniting us. And so I would give this description, Mike, and I should probably look at my watch here before I start it. I'll try to make it fast.
I'm keeping track.
Okay, 10 minutes. I'd give this description. When I was in shop class as a freshman in high school, we were supposed to do one project that we got graded on. And some of the other guys, their dad would buy them all the boards they needed in the fanciest thing. It could be mahogany, it could be walnut, whatever. And for some reason, no, there was none of those funds available to me. So, but I did come up with a piece of walnut about this big around, black walnut, and I chucked that on the lathe, well, I screwed it on the lathe, actually, this one, and cut a little base plate out for a lamp. Then I went through the scrap lumber box that was there, and I came up with a whole bunch of different pieces of different kinds of wood. Cedar and mahogany and walnut and oak and some pine and a whole multiple different list of colors. And I was able to reduce them down to each one of them be 4 inches by 4 inches. Stacked them up there and looked at it and said, well, this will make a nice lamp. And I arranged them so that the colors were varied and diverse, if you will. And it was kind of pretty. But if I'd have just sat there on that base, of course, it would have fallen over. It would have never been anything except just a pile of pieces of 4 by 4, 4 inches by 4 inch by 1 inch. But I glued them together and clamped them together and let them dry. Then I chucked that on the lathe and turned it down and made a lamp and affixed it to the walnut base. And I look at that now and I think that's what diversity is. Diversity can be turned into a strength, but you have to have some glue to hold it together, and that glue is called assimilation in America. And we've gotten away from assimilation. That's why diversity has been such an issue, and multiculturalism has been such an issue. And if we got back to assimilation, if we could embrace an American civilization first, instead of looking at our divisions, that is the kind, and that needs to be part of our culture, part of our educational system, part of our network of our churches, our faith organizations. If we assimilate to an American civilization, then diversity becomes a strength by the virtue of the glue of assimilation.
What do you think the biggest misconception or misperception people have of you is?
Well, if I'm watching what's going on with the criticism, that's where you go to find the misconceptions. And I won't list through all the things that I'm called on a daily basis, but if you take a stand, then that's what they do. So, but I don't hear any of that criticism from anybody that knows me. Anybody that's been around me, that's seen what I do and how I approach it, I don't hear any of that criticism. In fact, they defend me. It's the opposite. So I think that there's I don't know if I even want to tell you this, that it's there's a different heart than the public sees, and if they could see how this actually works on a day-to-day basis, if they could see my grandchildren, if they could see my family, if they know what we cared about, if we know what, if they could see the things that raised 3 sons and 8 grandchildren and a wife for 46 years and 3 wonderful daughters-in-law, how that family works, then I think they'd have a different opinion, and my critics would have a different opinion. And if they could see some of the other things that take place. For example, I mean, we're sitting here in Sioux City, and the Tanzanian miracle kids are here now. And that was a miracle. It was a chain of miracles. And when Dr. Steve Meyer called me that day, a year and a half or so ago, and I looked on my phone, and I see his name, and I know he's asking for a miracle. He was a linchpin of a chain of miracles. I had the chance to forge one link in that chain of miracles, and that was a transportation link that got those kids out of Tanzania and to Sioux City. And if we'd been 1 or 2 days later in doing that, they would all be dead today, I believe. And you know, they didn't see Marilyn and me back in Tanzania at Kilimanjaro Airport on August 18th, 2017, to welcome those 3 Tanzanian miracle kids back to their home country. They didn't see the thousands of Tanzanians there that covered that tarmac that day, and they didn't hear their chorus like the Supremes singing the songs that they had written for the summer to welcome their 3 children home that they thought they'd never see again. And they didn't see the Tanzanians singing their national anthem by the thousands of them at the top of their lungs in Swahili. And I didn't see what was happening when I knew it was coming back to our U.S. national anthem, to the Star-Spangled Banner, after thousands singing at the top of their lungs in their Tanzanian anthem. And Steve Meyer was standing just behind me. I knew we were up next with our national anthem. And I leaned back to him and I said, we're really going to have to belt this one out, because only 4 of us knew the anthem there, and we're surrounded by thousands. And we did. And we sang our national anthem at the top of our lungs. And it was one of the times that it made me very proud to be an American. So that's some of the things. And my memory is replete with incidents along the way that turn out for the good. And I would say maybe that's a place to stop, because the clock's ticking, Mike.
Well, I was going to try to get one more issue question in if I can.
Can I have a follow-up?
Am I doing all right?
You've got 4 minutes.
5 minutes or so?
What did you see in the Iowa Senate that you said you liked multiculturalism when you were in the Iowa Senate, but that you soon saw that it was turned to miss, or whatever? What happened in the Iowa Senate?
Well, I don't know if I can give you the specific incidents, but I could see that over on the other side of the aisle was being used as a political tool. And so once it's used as a political tool, it's hard to go back to what I thought it was formed for, was just to show respect for all people. And I think by now a lot of the public sees it the same way, that it's a political tool rather than a method of demonstrating support for all people in all cultures. But you know, when there's a component of this that we ought to understand, is that multiculturalism, the people who promote that believe, or at least they say, that all cultures are equal. And if that were the case, then all civilizations would be equal in their success. And I say instead that if you look at the history of Western civilization, we have really made the progress in the world, far more progress than any other civilization has. And we should identify that. We should be proud of it. We shouldn't be arrogant about it. But at one time, we had so much confidence in our civilization that we promoted our civilization around the world and encouraged other countries to adopt our Western civilization to significant success. And Western civilization is everywhere where Christianity has laid the foundation for civilization. And then it's a Judeo-Christian belief system. Doesn't mean that everybody has to go to a church, let alone one church. But it's free enterprise capitalism, it's the rule of law, it's a whole network. And when you look around the world and you think, where's Western civilization today? Well, it's all of the Western Hemisphere. Every square inch of the Western Hemisphere is. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, goes east probably as far as Moscow, maybe a little beyond that. They get a little confused once you get east of Moscow. Australia, New Zealand, and now we've got the Japanese that have embraced Western civilization, and they're considered to be at least an emerging component of Western civilization. So I think we need to identify what has made us successful, and we ought to be adopting from other cultures those things that can make us more successful, but we should not delude ourselves into believing that all cultures are equal, because they are not.
Instead of that last issue question, to keep everyone, mostly you, on schedule, I'm going to move to my wrap-up question, and that's just, why should voters in the 4th District give you another 2 years in the U.S. House?
Well, first I'd say look at my history. They know that I've been representing their values. And the things that I say that I'm going to do and the positions that I take are the positions I hold. I went around during the presidential campaign and would stand up in front of crowds of sometimes hundreds of people and say, I've given you my word for all of these years, and there isn't anybody in this crowd can say that I've ever gone back on it. So that's one thing, I give my word. And I keep my word. Some people will say that, well, I may not agree with Steve King on everything. Well, my wife doesn't either, for that matter, but she knows where I stand, so does everybody else. And I think that's important. If you're gonna waffle or obfuscate on issues, then it's hard to trust somebody like that, and you have to always go around behind them and try to figure out what did they really mean, or did they give themselves some room, some weasel word. I don't do that. I tell people exactly where I stand and why, and if I don't know, I tell them that. They know that I am a full spectrum constitutional Christian conservative. I stand up for life. And by the way, we never got to that question. I'm a little surprised at that because right here on my lapel is the heartbeat pin. And I have to look and make sure there. And this is a commitment that I've made, and all the pro-life people in this district know, and actually most of them in the country know. I wrote the heartbeat bill. And I did that out of an inspiration that came to me at the funeral of Phyllis Schlafly, who wanted me to do that. And I was sitting right behind Donald and Melania Trump when I made that commitment at that funeral. So I went back to Washington, wrote the bill, and very carefully put all the brains together to get the best product we could get. Introduced it in February of 2017. And I'm now at 174 co-sponsors on this legislation. No one has brought a piece of pro-life legislation that has anywhere near this much impact, nearly this far. And I expect that we will have a markup on it after the election in November. I don't quite have that as a commitment yet, but I expect we will get that done. Then I wrote the bill for the Iowa legislature and served it up to the state Senate and helped work that through. They did a terrific job. We had to work it a lot harder in the House, but that's the basis of that language is what I served to the Senate, and we worked with them all the way through. For 7 weeks, I worked votes on the Iowa House of Representatives before we got to only 51 to get it to the floor, and then, of course, the governor signed it. So no one doubts where I stand as a pro-life member of the United States Congress. In fact, I don't know if there's anybody that's got a stronger position on it right now than I do. We also have 163 national organizations supporting the heartbeat bill. So I am a full spectrum fiscal and social conservative. I believe in life, I believe in marriage, I believe in the Constitution and free enterprise capitalism and a strong national defense. And my life has been right in the middle of the agriculture economy. I've been promoting trade all of the time that I've been in Congress, and that's a record that's pretty clear. The only time we ever really counted the agriculture organizations that supported me was in 2012 when I was running against the wife of the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. And in that race, there were 60 different agriculture organizations that played in that race. They either wrote a PAC check or made an endorsement or both. And of those 60, all 60 of them endorsed me in that race. And even though Christy Vilsack was the wife of the Secretary of Agriculture. So, and by the way, we have, I want to give credit to some of my staff. We helped shape the locations and put the right people together to build ethanol plants across this district and state. I don't actually know how many, and that's okay. But there's been a lot more influence behind the scenes there than people see. But when the ethanol plants were coming together, we had one of our top people was constantly churning through there. He would circle back to me and say, "What do you think? Let's put the right people at the table." We would do that, and that would ends up being the board of directors. So I look around there now and I think, how much difference have we made? We've got a lot of ethanol plants that might have been configured differently. I think most of them would have been built, but they might have been configured differently and located differently. We have a 4-lane Highway 20 that we'll be cutting the ribbon on October 19th. And a lot of people worked on that, and I'm very thankful to them, and some of them are very good friends. And I want to remember those that didn't live to see this day on October 19th. But I would say this, that if I hadn't been involved in this, we wouldn't be cutting this ribbon October 19th. And I can say that specifically, and not to take anything away from anyone, but several years ago I earmarked funds for right-of-way acquisition in engineering, environmental, and archaeological for a 4-lane Highway 20 west of Highway 71. And I remember when that language came back to me when I dictated it, it didn't say west of 71. But, you know, and sometimes I don't even have time to read it. It's just things are flying along. This one I grabbed and I read it and I said, where's west of 71? Oh, we didn't get that in there, Congressman. And I said, we need to change it. Well, it's too late. Because I don't think that we can allow it to be too late. I went back and pushed it again, and we kind of slipped that language in before it went to the floor. And we ended up with an earmark that allowed the DOT to purchase right-of-way west of 71, and well before they had it programmed, and to do the engineering so it was ready, and the environmental and the archaeological. So then when the funds were available, it was shovel ready from early all the way to Mobile, I guess you would say, at this point. So this would have happened without me, probably. 4-lane Highway 20 probably would have happened without me because there was a good team of people working on it. But it wouldn't be done October 19th. I know that. And there are other ways that we accelerated it along the way, too, that aren't as quantifiable. So I've been pushing transportation issues aggressively, trade issues, agriculture issues, national defense issues, foreign policy issues, the social agenda, trying to protect as many lives as possible. And by the way, I kind of get a little smile when I go by Planned Parenthood and I can just still read the letters in the glue up on top of there. I'm happy that they're no longer with an open shop here in Sioux City. So that's probably enough of a commercial for Steve King, but the people have been watching know.
I want to thank you for your time again today, Congressman.
Thank you, Mike.